Anime has a unique way of being the messenger, whether that be in the form of direct statements, implied metaphors through visual storytelling, or centering the plot around one key message intertwined with the main events of a series. There's always some sort of lesson or virtue to be taken from a piece of literature or visual media, and for those of you familiar with my content, you know that one of my primary goals is to highlight said lessons and virtues. And yet, the lesson to be learned here is nothing short of cold reality. We are often subject to many life events where we feel as if, regardless of our feelings on the matter, nothing can be done to change the status quo. Nothing can be done for our efforts to be recognized. Nothing can be done to make our voice heard. But then eventually, whether by coincidence, accident, or fated reunion, there's a spark. And that spark spreads like wildfire just for you to recognize that there is indeed a faint light at the end of the tunnel. That there is something that can be done, that you have a chance to rewrite your own history. At this point, you may be thinking, what does this have to do with a series seemingly revolving around terrorism? Well, that's just it. This is not simply a story about terrorism, nor is it a story of cruelty, systematic oppression, or tragedy. Not a story of hate, yet one filled with much grief felt from the very depths of the soul. Instead, I would like to take you all on a journey with the voices of those who wanted nothing more than to prove that they existed. So, strap in, grab a drink, and right after making sure you like, comment, and subscribe, let's get into it, shall we? Zankyo no Terror, better known as Terror Resonance, is an anime original coming out of Studio Mappa in 2014. Wait, what? Another one? Why are all the good shows I'm finding anime originals? This is insane. And primarily tells the story of two individuals, Kokonoe Arata and Toji Hisami, or more consistently known as 9 and 12, united under the moniker Sphinx. And our initial introduction to them is stealing what looks like a fucking demon core out of a remote nuclear facility. So, crazy shit already, classic terrorist behavior. Except, we later come to find out that things aren't quite as clear-cut as they seem. Scattered throughout the rubble and the debris are riddles cluing into these seemingly mindless attacks, and on the receiving end of these riddles is Metropolitan Police Detective Shibazaki Kenjiro, who manages to slowly put together the link to the riddles as originating from a Greek tragedy, Oedipus Rex, and later coming to the realization that he plays a bigger role in the stories of Sphinx, as he himself is designated as their Oedipus, as their witness to their tragedy, along with the fact that despite all their heinous actions, not a single person has died, leading him on a journey to uncover their true motive. And caught in the middle of it all is Mishima Lisa, an ordinary high school girl living with an overprotective mother, constantly being bullied at school, quietly wishing for the world that gave her this horrible life to come to an end, is roped into a conflict between terror and government, only to slowly give us a glimpse into the humanity of the men behind the smokescreen, to give two individuals abandoned by the system who created them a like-minded teenager born from a seemingly normal life of loneliness and seclusion to connect with, if nothing more than to recognize that no matter how different the circumstances or the conditions surrounding the three of them that made them who they are all ultimately cut from the same cloth of not wanting to be forgotten by the world. Now, considering most, not all, but most of this is happening throughout the first episode is a wild way to introduce a series. You've got entire buildings being blown up, the police are scrambling without any sort of lead on these guys, and no one is any wiser to their actions, which, yeah, cool, stuff blowing up, our protagonists keep getting away with it, that's cool and all, but what is this really about? Well, aside from the absolutely beautiful soundtrack that completely sucks you in and at times momentarily makes you forget the premise of the series that you're watching, you very quickly figure out that these guys that are blowing up rather specific targets are very careful not to hurt anybody, or at least not fatally, which then begs the question, why? Why blow up these targets? What crucial connection do they all hold that makes them your targets in the first place? And then it hits that realization that all of this is simply to send a message. Specifically, send a message to someone that can connect the dots and piece together the link between all these locations that make them targets for bombings. Someone like Shibazaki, who can piece together the locations as all being owned or headed by figureheads belonging to one organization in particular. Now, the thing that stands out as a little confusing to me at first when we're not neck deep in gunpowder is how relatively normal 9 and 12 are. The way they act, the way they conduct themselves. You could almost say it's very bizarre to think of them as terrorists in this light. Though, of the two, I would say a much better example of this is 12. He's very expressive and has these near childlike curiosities. It's almost like he has a separate focus of having fun and enjoying his life by living in the moment. And that'll tie into one particular scene I want to get into later. That aforementioned behavior is also what I would give credit to 12 and Lisa developing a sort of friendly dynamic, which is not only a very crucial point for Lisa, but for 12 as well. Given how the first couple of episodes presents Lisa's situation, it's safe to say that she probably doesn't have any friends. Her mother's deranged beyond belief, she's constantly being bullied, and it just gives this feeling of loneliness. She doesn't have a support mechanism, she doesn't have these moments of peace and satisfaction, and it leads her down a dark mental rabbit hole of ultimately wishing that the world would come crashing down around her, for only then could she find peace. Now, there's one specific thing I'd like to point out from that, but to get there, I also need to talk about Shibazaki a bit, and honestly, there's not much more I could say on the plot itself without just spoiling everything, which would partially defeat the purpose of this video. But on that note, ladies and gents, Detective Shibazaki. This man is the textbook definition of why I like seeing characters unravel mysteries. He's dedicated, he has that itch, that obsession, whatever you want to call it, to put together the puzzle pieces that seemingly have no link. It's almost as if he's caught in a trance, racking his brain for that missing link as he combs through a sea of whys. Now, of course, he has his own personal reasons for doing so, and practically refuses to be told not to do his job, which I feel you there, buddy, it's not fun. Though it seems the further down he digs in the rabbit hole, the wider the hole gets, and slowly but surely, his fixation on answers surfaces that final piece of the puzzle that I, as a viewer, was looking for. A commonality between all of our main characters, and it's simple. Shackles. This calls for the mention of a particular quote that is rather fascinating to think on, which is, everyone is a prisoner of their own experiences. In other words, the events that shape you, mold you into who you are, your actions, your words, your way of thinking will ultimately bind you in the same way that they benefit you, whether that be passing experiences, the past, present, future, there'll always be some sort of idea that ties you down. And I don't think anything else qualifies as a stronger commonality to our main protagonists. 9 and 12 are prisoner to the thought of their past never being brought to light, despite the horrible circumstances that made them into who they are. Lisa is effectively drowning in her own isolation and mistreatment from her environment, leading her to think that the only way to come up for air is to remove the ocean surrounding her. Shibazaki is bound by his own curiosity to figure out the circumstances behind the events he's been led to investigate. And of course, the only thing that comes after being tied down to something you don't want to be held prisoner to is freedom. 9 and 12 can be free of being forgotten. Lisa can be free of not being needed by anyone. Shibazaki can be free of his obligation to bring the circumstances of those mass teenagers to light after knowing just why would they go to such lengths to do so. And in doing all this, they can find their own peace. And ultimately, they do end up finding their own peace, yet out of all the turmoil, the consequences, the unfortunate circumstance surrounding our characters, there's one particular scene that stands out indescribably among any others, combining the stunning visuals, beauty of the soundtrack, and feeling of aforementioned freedom in a beautiful combination I can only describe with one word: serenity. Despite all the hectic shit that goes on during the rest of the very short 11-episode runtime, I feel like this one scene is the best example of what encapsulates 9 and 12's deepest wish to the viewer. It was never about getting back at the people who wronged them, it was never about retaliating against the world. Hell, I'm even close to arguing that the message we were supposed to garner from this was never about the abuse of authority to rob innocent children of their lives for their own gain. It was simply about living in this one moment, as time stops, as if saying to remember this moment, to never forget, to remember that we exist. With my final wish to you being to experience this series for yourself, I bid you farewell. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.